Okay. Colleagues, I would like to call this meeting to order. Dear colleagues, distinguished delegates, good morning. I'm so happy to be with you here today in person. It's really a big difference to see you all. I'm really looking forward to our meeting today and for our coming discussions. And thank you all for all nice greetings. So dear colleagues, welcome back to the second part of the third meeting of the SBI. We made an excellent start of our plenary meeting on Monday, and I'm confident we can continue making progress today. For our meeting today, we will consider the following. First, under agenda item 5, we will consider the draft post-2020 Gender Plan of Action. As you will recall, we had planned to consider this matter during our plenary on Monday, but ran out of time. Therefore, it will be our first item today. Second, also under agenda item 5, we will conduct our first reading for the communications plan for the post-2020 period. Third, under agenda item 8, we will resume our first reading on cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives. Fourth, under agenda item 7, we will review a CRP with a view to approving it on the evaluation of a strategic framework for capacity building and development to support the effective implementation of a Nagoya Protocol. And fifth, under agenda item 11, we will review 2 CRPs on mainstreaming with a view to approving them. And finally, I will also invite the co-chairs of 3 SBI contact groups to report back on their progress. Before turning our attention to the first item, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat to provide us with information for taking the floor. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. We want to remind you that due to sanitary requirements because of COVID-19, delegates are kindly reminded to wear face masks at all times, except when taking the floor, and to ensure their masks properly cover mouth and nose. Now, before beginning, I would like to remind delegates that the proceedings of all plenary and contact group sessions can be followed online using the virtual platform Interactio in viewer mode by all registered delegates. Access is provided via the meeting calendar using the credentials provided with your priority pass. Now let me turn to the use of the microphones here in the room. When the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the button in front of you only once. The microphone will be lit green and we will be notified of your request. When the chair gives you the floor, the light on your microphone will turn red. Please start speaking when the red light comes on. Please remove your earphone, speak close to the microphone, and remove your mask at that time. Slowly and clearly speak into the microphone so that our dedicated team of interpreters can provide a clear translation. Some observer delegates who request the floor may not be identified by their organization name. In this case, when your microphone is on, please be sure to identify your organization before commencing your intervention. Statements on each agenda item from parties and observers will be limited to 6 minutes on behalf of regions or groups, 3 minutes for individual parties, 3 minutes for major groups, and 2 minutes for observers as time allows. The time for statements is limited, therefore a clock is provided on the screen to help you manage your time. But please do not speed up your reading. Rather, when speaking, please pause between sentences to make it easier for the interpreters and all delegates to follow. For statements made in plenary, delegates are requested to upload their statement using the online application on the meeting page. It greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters if you can upload your statements in advance of delivery. However, they will only be posted on the website after delivery. In any case, statements must be posted on the same day that the statements were made or the agenda item considered. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. Uploading instructions were included in your Priority Pass email along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. You can also use the number on your badge to get to your dedicated link. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Let us now turn to our first agenda item. Distinguished delegates, I now invite you to consider Agenda Item 5 on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. You will recall that there are several issues being considered under this agenda item. At the first part of SBI-3, we were able to prepare 2 conference room papers under this item. For today's discussion, the relevant CRP is CBD, SBI-3 CRP9 on other matters related to a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And as you can see in the footnotes in the recommended draft decision for COP in this CRP, 2 further documents were to be prepared, namely a Gender Plan of Action for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and a framework for a communications strategy. As a result of this intersessional work, we have now 2 new documents to consider under this item during this meeting. Document CBD 3.4 Add 2 Rev 2 on a draft post-2020 Gender Plan of Action, and Document CBD SBI 3.4 Add 1 Rev 1 on Communication for a Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Today, we will first focus on the Gender Plan of Action for the post-2020 period, and we will then focus on the communications for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I will now give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documents for our discussion on the Gender Plan of Action. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. A draft outline of a post-2020 Gender Plan of Action, document CBD SBI 3.4 Add 2 Rev 1, was presented for consideration at the virtual formal session of the 3rd meeting of the SBI, held from 3rd May to 13 June 2021, under Agenda Item 5 concerning the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As noted in document CBD SBI 3 CRP 9, the SBI decided to defer consideration of the draft recommendation on the matter in order to allow an additional period of consultation. An extended consultation was held on the draft outline from 23 June to 29 July 2021, which comprised a two-part virtual discussion and written submissions. On the basis of the inputs and submissions received during this extended consultation, the Secretariat has prepared document CBD-SBI-3 for Add 2, Rev 2. The document proposes elements for a draft recommendation and contains the draft post-2020 Gender Plan of Action in an annex to the document. The annex includes the proposed purpose, modalities, expected outcomes and objectives, and associated elements of the draft post-2020 Gender Plan of Action. The draft recommendation is proposed to replace the decision text put forward in CBD SBI 3 CRP 9. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Let me now invite delegates to take the floor on the new documents for Agenda Item 5 on the Gender Plan of Action for the post-2020 period. I would like to remind delegates to focus their comments on the new documents, as we already heard interventions on all other documents in May 2021. I will start with regional groups, followed by parties, other governments and observers, and I encourage you to keep your statements short and concise. So I will now move to interventions from regional groups. Okay, I start with the European Union. You have the floor. And you have the floor and please keep the time for 6 minutes. The EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. We thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the first version, followed by this revised draft version of the Gender Plan of Action. The European Union and its member states would like to share the following. We welcome the revised draft version of the Gender Plan of Action contained in document CBD/SBI/3/4/Add2/Rev2 and emphasize the importance of mainstreaming gender equality and gender responsiveness as overarching concepts for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and its implementation. The revised draft Gender Plan of Action further provides a good example of how a mainstreamed human rights-based approach can enable and strengthen the implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The European Union and its member states are rather in favor of including gender-inclusive approaches in all existing voluntary participation funds and projects instead of establishing a dedicated Women's Delegate Fund. The European Union and its member states would therefore suggest encouraging financial support to the existing voluntary funding for participation or financial support to participation directly through the existing networks, which are active in the implementation of the Gender Plan of Action. To improve the implementation of the Gender Action Plan, the European Union and its member states refer to a specific target within the GBF, as well as report on indicators related to women's and girls' contributions to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. We look forward to further discussing the Gender Action Plan in the contact group in the following days. We will submit our comments on the draft recommendation and the draft action plan in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, EU and its member states. Do we have more regions? No?
Just say, I see no more requests from...
I see no more requests from the regions. I hope that is correct.
Yes.
Okay. We will now move to interventions from parties. And so if parties would like to comment on this, please raise your flags and ask for the floor.
Canada.
And I have Canada on my list, followed by New Zealand. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First and foremost, Canada would like to express its support for the adoption of the new Gender Plan of Action as a key component of the Global Biodiversity Framework that will help guide its implementation. Canada believes that in order to accomplish this important task, it will be essential for the objectives and actions identified in the Gender Plan of Action to be firmly centered within the scope of the 3 objectives of the Convention, and that its primary purpose should be to provide the required guidance for parties to implement the Convention's objectives and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in a gender-responsive manner. In this way, Canada believes that the Gender Plan of Action should help parties integrate gender considerations into the existing work outlined in the GBF, as well as through the existing implementation mechanisms for reporting, planning, review, knowledge management, and resource mobilization. On a final procedural note, Canada would like to note the importance of ensuring that any gender plan of action related recommendations and decision wording be included in the main decision document as opposed to in an addendum document. Canada will be submitting our more detailed written comments on the Gender Plan of Action to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I now give the floor to UK, followed by Bangladesh. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we are very glad to see you back with us in good health. The UK recognises the importance of addressing gender considerations in all aspects of the implementation of the Convention and its protocols, and we recognise the vital role that better gender mainstreaming plays from a local to a global level in the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. We thank the work of the CBD Secretariat and its extended consultation and virtual discussion sessions with parties and other stakeholders, and we are supportive of the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action as a basis to guide effective implementation. The UK has one substantive amendment to the Gender Plan of Action, which relates to paragraph 10 of the draft decision on the establishment of a separate Women's Delegate Fund. We do not agree that establishing a separate Women's Delegate Fund would be the best way of ensuring better participation of women, nor is it the best use of existing mechanisms. We believe that an additional fund would create confusion for parties attempting to support delegate participation and possibly create competition between the funds. We believe, therefore, that the existing Special Voluntary Trust Fund should be strengthened to ensure it aligns with the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action and supports the representation and active participation of women in Convention processes. We openly invite parties to make contributions to this fund for this purpose, and the UK will continue to look to do this as a priority going forward. The UK will be submitting these comments and some further streamlining comments in writing, and we look forward to further discussions with parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. And my sincere apologies to New Zealand. I know you were before on the list, so I now give the floor to New Zealand, followed by Bangladesh. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. New Zealand welcomes the revised draft of the Gender Plan of Action for the post-2020 period and thanks the Secretariat for its efforts to reflect the feedback provided to date. we recognise the Action Plan's important role to support and advance the gender-responsive implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We are pleased to see the plan's focus on supporting the meaningful, informed and effective engagement of women and girls from Indigenous peoples and local communities, and to recognise and value their traditional knowledge and practices in support of the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. We welcome the plan's upfront references to intersectionality, clarifying that references to women and girls in the expected outcomes, objectives and actions should be understood to include those who identify as women and girls in all of their diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. And I give the floor to Bangladesh, followed by Argentina and then Colombia. Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bangladesh complements the efforts of the Secretariat for the preparation of the draft Gender Action Plan for post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, especially recognizing women's role in the conservation of biodiversity. Bangladesh would like to see that participation and engagement of all gender constituencies in the implementation of the post-2020 biodiversity framework so that all could equitably enjoy the benefits of sustainable use of biodiversity. Bangladesh also believes in the equal representation of women, girls, small ethnic groups, and local community people for the conservation of biological resources, utilizing the traditional knowledge, practices, technologies, and culture. Bangladesh emphasizes on the allocation of adequate resources for improvement of the standard of livelihood of local communities that would also contribute to halt degradation of biological resources. Bangladesh is confident of the inclusive engagement of the women's, local community and minority groups in the development and implementation of National Biodiversity Studies and Action Plan and Program for ensuring gender-responsive post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Bangladesh. And I give the floor to Argentina, followed by Colombia and then Malawi. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ante todo,
would like, before everything else, to thank the Secretariat for the work implemented. We also focus on the considerable progress on this document. We're satisfied by the fact that the great majority of comments presented by our country were taken into account in the new version. We welcome the fact that the human rights approach has been explicitly reflected to also reflect the general gender and diversity viewpoint. We also see that measures proposed are in accord with this approach because they touch upon various aspects of access to rights on the basis of gender and biodiversity. We're also satisfied by the fact that the new version has incorporated notions of diversity in general and has a more profound concept of gender, differentiating the the concept of women, including the LGBTI plus group. We also stress that Argentina considers the document shouldn't be changed as far as the substance is concerned. At a later stage, we could include some more progressive ideas, including the gaps of disequality and the measures connected to specific sectors, also transversal questions, but that would be left for later. We are ready to approve the document as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. And I'll give the floor to Colombia, followed by Malawi and then Sudan. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are pleased to have this updated proposal for a gender action plan, and in general terms, we agree with the wording and focus of the objectives and measures proposed. Likewise, we highlight the importance of having this action plan as the roadmap for the effective integration of gender consideration in the post-2020 framework, and particularly in the monitoring mechanism. In this regard, we have the following initial comments to strengthen the proposal. The burdens and inequalities regarding women and girls in biodiversity management go beyond the benefits derived from access to genetic resources. For this reason, we consider it necessary to incorporate equitable participation of women in receiving the benefits derived from the use of biodiversity in all of its components. The plan must contribute to the achievement of the 3 objectives of the agreement in an integral manner. Also, the draft decision of the COP must include a strong message regarding the need to implement the action plan. Likewise, we support in the draft decision an inclusion of the action plan in the MBSAPs, and we consider it necessary to include new text in view of the need to articulate and promote synergies in the implementation of the CBD Gender Action Plan with the gender plans or strategies that parties are also developing under commitments made in other MEAs and relevant multilateral processes. On the other hand, it is important to be clear about the roles and functions of the national focal points on gender and biodiversity proposed in paragraph 6 of the draft decision. Finally, regarding paragraph 8, it is important that the midterm reviews proposed for this plan can be incorporated into the global stocktake proposed under Team 9 of the SBI in order to carry out a comprehensive evaluation of the implementation of the post-2020 framework. Madam Chair, it is essential that the Gender Action Plan be an integral part of the COP15 decision that adopts the post-2020 global framework for biodiversity, and that it is included in the framework as a cross-cutting instrument for the implementation of its goals. In the interest of time, we will send in writing our documents, our comments and punctual test proposals for the objectives, actions, and deliverables of the action plan, as well as of the draft recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. I now give the floor to Malawi, followed by Sudan, and then Paraguay. Malawi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi speaks on behalf of Africa. Africa would like to support Canada for the statement on gender. Africa welcomes the Gender Action Plan, and also as Africa, we recognize the importance of gender in the effective implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The African continent also recognizes that men, women, boys, and girls are affected differently when it comes to biodiversity loss and land degradation, and that men, women, girls, and boys, they also contribute differently when it comes to restoration and conservation of biodiversity. And we also note that women are the most vulnerable. Women and girls are the most vulnerable, especially in developing countries when it comes to land degradation and biodiversity loss. And therefore, it is our wish that we see gender groups being clearly mainstreamed in most of the targets in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And it is also the desire of Africa that the indicators should clearly spell out how gender participation will be measured in the Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. And I'll give the floor to Sudan, followed by Paraguay, and then Costa Rica. Sudan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sudan supports the statement by Malawi on behalf of Africa. Also, Sudan would like to welcome the document on
بين الجنسين في حفظ التنوع الحيوي واستخدامه. عليه يجب أن تركز الوثيقة على الجنسين والتكافؤ بينهما وضمان المساواة في وصول النساء إلى الموارد والخدمات لدعم
and to enable everyone to be able to participate in the governance and in the protection of biodiversity. Also, Sudan would like for gender considerations to be placed in the GBF in all its targets. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Sudan. I now give the floor to Paraguay, followed by Costa Rica, then South Africa. Paraguay, you have the floor.
I thank you very much, Madam Chair. The actual version of this document unfortunately is not acceptable for my delegation. We continue our consultations on several aspects, in particular, as far as the phrase women and girls. We're strong and in favor of gender equality, but our national constitution and our internal legislation has other definitions. We're waiting for instructions concerning this language and also concerning the interpretation of the expression all the genders that is included in the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Paraguay. I now give the floor to Costa Rica, followed by South Africa. Costa Rica, you have the floor. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Costa Rica welcomes the importance of the gender action plan and plan of action, and we welcome the result of the work in the contact group. We understand that there is capacity development in the area of implementation. We believe that these elements should be seen as substantive elements in the implementation according to specific goals or targets in the gender equality area, including Target 22, concerning the link between women's equality and biodiversity. We believe that implementation should take into account this reality. Women have always had a special relationship to nature, and we have made an important contribution to the use of the biodiversity resources and to the development of the planet's resources, and this should be recognized. Thus, we support the gender plan of action, but we focus on Target 22 as exclusively targeted on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa Rica. I now give the floor to South Africa, followed by Venezuela and then Mexico. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. South Africa supports the intervention made by Malawi on behalf of Africa. South Africa is in agreement with the gender-responsive plan of action to support the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We view this action plan will contribute to strengthening the role of gender in the work to implement the convention. While supporting the proposed specific gender fund by the EU, we request that the idea be incorporated in the broader Global Biodiversity Impact Fund as proposed by Africa Group. We also welcome capacity building efforts to strengthen women's role in decision-making. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. I now give the floor to Venezuela, followed by Mexico and then Zimbabwe. Venezuela, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela would like to thank the Secretariat for presenting this document, and we'd like to say that we agree with the incorporation of the gender perspective in the 2020 framework. The preamble of the convention recognizes explicitly the fundamental role played by women in the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, and it reaffirms the essential nature of the full participation of women, including indigenous women and those from local communities, in the implementation of the convention. Therefore, the gender plan should consider this spirit in a global way. Our country recognizes the invaluable role of women, including indigenous women and women from local communities, in the global 2020 framework, through the incorporation of their informed, full, and effective participation at all levels of planning, implementation, and supervision, as well as review and access to the benefits of the framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Venezuela. I now get the floor to Mexico, followed by Zimbabwe and then Egypt. Mexico, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico thanks the Secretariat for the work done to prepare the draft of a much-needed gender plan of action. Mexico, in line with its feminist foreign policy, believes it is essential to advance gender equality, women's empowerment, and women's rights alongside biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and benefit sharing. Mexico welcomes the revised draft as a good basis for our discussion. Nonetheless, we need to recognize that a gender plan of action without the means of implementation, it is only a collection of words with good intentions. In this sense, we need to ensure the alignment between the post-2020 gender plan of action and the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development, so that key capacity building needs and priorities required for the gender-responsive implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework are addressed. Mexico strongly supports Costa Rica's proposal of a standalone target on women's rights and gender equality to send a clear signal that women's rights and gender equality are a fundamental prerequisite for effective biodiversity action. As Colombia mentioned, we need to incorporate the gender perspective as an overarching principle, and it's imperative that we reflect this at COP15. For the sake of time, we will be sending in our comments in writing, and we are looking forward to delve into the specifics in the contact group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. I now get the floor to Zimbabwe, followed by Egypt and then Norway. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Zimbabwe associates itself with the statement by Malawi on behalf of Africa. As Zimbabwe, we welcome the new, revised and updated draft post-2020 gender plan of action. Indeed, women, girls, and boys play a critical role in biodiversity protection. This gender plan will help in the implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework in a gender-responsive manner. However, the plan remains amenable to fine-tuning for effective implementation to ensure the full participation of various gender groups. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. I now get the floor to Egypt, followed by Norway and then Peru. Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next Monday, that is to say, within only a few days, the world is going to celebrate the Mother's Day, the 21st of March, and this is an occasion while we are discussing here this gender plan. It's a good thing for us to say Happy Mother's Day. Women in our culture have a great role, and in our heritage, in our culture, women have occupied extremely important positions. They were queens, and they occupied several positions. Let us remember together that there is what we call the Arabic expression, which is that paradise lays beneath the feet of mothers, or as the speaker says, heavens are beneath the feet of mothers, which means that our culture devotes great attention to women, not only in view of the important role of women, but also through our own experience. We know that women have a knowledge of biodiversity which far exceed the knowledges of men, especially in marginalized societies and in local societies. And therefore, we support not only the participation of women in all activities that we have before us, but more. And therefore, we accept this draft, we agree to this draft that we have submitted to us. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Egypt. I now get the floor to Norway, followed by Peru and then Kenya. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We welcome the Gender Plan of Action. And we also want to underline that we think gender is an important cross-cutting issue in the global biodiversity framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. It was very concise. I now give the floor to Peru, followed by Kenya, and then Ecuador. Peru, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I just need a few seconds. Here we go. Peru is grateful to the Secretariat for the efforts that it has made to fulfill the review of the revisions of the document corresponding to Agenda Item 5. Peru acknowledges the importance of incorporating gender in order to conserve biological diversity with vital challenges for the strategy of gender in the world framework biological diversity and in order to meet the three objectives of the convention. It is very important to involve the indigenous people and local communities to fulfill the plan which we believe will assist sustainable development. We will be presenting our contributions for this to the declaration. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. I now give the floor to Kenya, followed by Ecuador, and then Australia. Kenya, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Kenya associates with the statement made by Malawi on behalf of Africa. Kenya is particularly appreciative that the revised draft now supports and advances the gender-responsive implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Furthermore, the fact that the plan will also support the gender-responsive approach to apply the implementation mechanism associated with the framework is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. I now give the floor to Ecuador, followed by Australia, and then Côte d'Ivoire. Ecuador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will be very brief. Ecuador thanks the Secretariat for the preparation of the draft gender plan of action. Would like to state that in general, we're in agreement with the objectives and approaches of the plan, and we would like to also support what was said by the distinguished delegate of Costa Rica in the sense that an establishment of a new target should be considered so that we could streamline the revision of this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Ecuador. I now give the floor to Australia, followed by Côte d'Ivoire and then Togo. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Australia is supportive of the draft Gender Plan of Action as a tool and guidance mechanism for the gender-responsive implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We believe there should be strong alignment between the Gender Plan of Action and the monitoring framework to ensure compliance, accountability and transparency. Australia supports the comments made by Canada and other parties this morning about the need to integrate gender consideration into existing funding and planning mechanisms rather than establishing a new fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. I now give the floor to Côte d'Ivoire, followed by Togo, and then Dominican Republic.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Côte d'Ivoire welcomes the Plan of Action for 2020. We support the statement made by Malawi on behalf of the African Group. Taking into account the gender equality is a challenge for our countries, and we would like to see measures for strengthening and developing capacity. Moreover, we welcome the consideration of gender equality and the rights of people in the Plan of Action for biodiversity, and we stress that the translation from English into French sometimes alters the understanding of some of the objectives and activities, some of the goals and activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Togo, followed by Dominican Republic. Togo, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Togo supports the statement made by Malawi when Malawi spoke on behalf of the Africa Group. Togo appreciates the taking into account of gender equality in this process of the post-2020 global framework acceptance. In view of the importance of the role of women in the management and conservation of natural resources, Togo has adopted a strategy for taking gender into account nationally in the plans and conservation plans of biodiversity. And we support the proposal which was made by Costa Rica for the adoption of a standalone target to this effect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Dominican Republic, followed by Burundi and then Guatemala. Dominican Republic, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
I thank you, Madam Chair. The Dominican Republic delegation would like to join the expressions of thanks to the Secretary for the document and supports the substance of the document as well as the draft gender plan of action for the post-2020 period. Our delegation, as others, has made an effort to integrate women in the participation in the sustainable use of biodiversity, but we realize we must still make great efforts. The Dominican Republic supports the proposal for a new target by Costa Rica so that we would be guided in the implementation of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Burundi, followed by Guatemala, and then Trinidad and Tobago. Burundi, you have the floor. Oh, sorry, I did a mistake. I think I get the floor to Guatemala. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Guatemala
would like to reaffirm the importance of including women, girls, youth, and the overall society in the future implementation of the global framework for biodiversity. We'd like to support the statement made by Costa Rica, Mexico, and other parties who talked about the development of a specific target which deals with this, because it is extremely important and will help to implement the convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guatemala. I now give the floor to Burundi, followed by Trinidad and Tobago, and then Chile. Burundi, you have the floor.
Burundi supports the Malawi statement on behalf of Africa. We acknowledge the role played by women and indigenous women in the conservation of biodiversity. And this should be taken into account in the plan of action for the World Framework of Biodiversity post-2020. The plan could stress the strength capacity building so that it can develop general activities. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Burundi. I now give the floor to Trinidad and Tobago, then Chile. Trinidad and Tobago, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Trinidad and Tobago wishes to thank the Secretariat for the work done to develop this much-needed post-2020 gender plan of action. As a small island developing state, we recognize the important role of all genders in the conservation and sustainable use of our biodiversity resources. It is therefore of great importance that this plan supports and advances the gender-responsive implementation of the GBF. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Chile, followed by Tanzania, and then Uganda. Chile, you have the floor.
Thank you. Puedo hablar en español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Chile supports the new version of the gender-based plan, as well as a gender perspective and an approach based on human rights throughout the post-2020 period. We associate ourselves with what was said earlier by other delegations. Finally, about the proposal which we've heard from Costa Rica, in other words, a gender target, we're ready to try to find a space to discuss the possible inclusion of such a target in the suitable contact group, appropriate contact group. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Tanzania, followed by Uganda, and then United Arab Emirates. So Tanzania, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the floor. Tanzania associates our position with our African colleagues as expressed by Malawi. Tanzania welcomes the updated first draft document of a gender plan of action for the post-2020 period. Tanzania recognizes that women have the vital role to play in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and affirms the need for the full participation of women in the implementation of the convention and in post-2020 GBF in particular. In this regard, we propose also the inclusion of a gender-related target for girls and women, as how it has been expressed by other delegates, so much so that women and girls do not only participate, but they are fully engaged in the implementation of the post-2020 GBF, and they are going to be translated in the NBSAPs by parties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Tanzania. I now give the floor to Uganda, followed by United Arab Emirates, and then Benin. So Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the interest of time, I would like to support the remarks by Malawi, speaking on behalf of Africa. And indeed, we support the intervention of the many parties that have spoken in favor of the draft gender plan of action. We look forward to providing additional intervention when we come to the discussion of the document in detail. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. I now give the floor to United Arab Emirates, followed by Benin. United Arab Emirates, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, we would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the Gender Plan of Action post-2020, and we would also like to voice our support to this draft plan of action. The UAE is working to attain equality between the genders, and we support the importance of enabling and empowering women and youth in the implementation of the Convention, and also for their roles to be stepped up. The state in the UAE has devoted attention to women and youth through a number of steps to ensure active participation for women and to strengthen the spirit of leadership. And here women have been engaged and they have been appointed to very high posts. The UAE has got 9 women ministers, and women have occupied the role of a minister for health. It was a woman who was 20 years old, and this makes her the youngest minister in the world. Here we would like to support this draft. I thank you, Madam.
Thank you. And I think the last party on my list is Benin. Benin, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Benin would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this gender plan of action, and we support the statement that was made by Malawi on behalf of the Africa Group. Benin can support this new version, which establishes gender equality, youth, women, indigenous people in their roles played in the conservation of biodiversity. We support the idea of having a specific standalone target for the effective implementation of this plan of action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benin. And as we do not have any more requests from parties, I will now invite if there are other governments who would like to speak. Oh, sorry, I have one more party. DR Congo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. The Democratic Republic of Congo supports the statement made by Malawi, speaking on behalf of the Africa Group, whilst stressing the guarantee of the implementation, because if there are no means to implement this, it will be difficult to see for these plans to see the light of day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Congo. Now, now I don't see any. Okay, one more party. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India would like to thank the Secretariat for bringing the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action. India supports the Gender Plan Action and especially the legislation that provides equal rights of access, ownership, and control of land for women and men. India has more than 0.27 million biodiversity management countries across its territory, and 33% of members in each committee are women. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, India. So I see no more requests from parties for the floor. So I will invite if other governments would like to speak. No? So I will then invite organizations speak. Start with the representatives of the major stakeholder groups. So I would now like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of the major groups of stakeholders. Each statement should not exceed 3 minutes.
Can I ask the women's IPLC?
Is IPLC?
Yeah.
So I will start with the women. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the Women's Caucus. First, I take the floor to thank the champions of gender equality here: Costa Rica, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Ecuador, Togo, Chile, and Tanzania. Thank you very much. Women's rights are human rights. Women play a vital role in the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. This is recognized in the Convention on Biological Diversity's preamble, including the need for the full participation of women at all levels of policy making. The draft plan states it is a key instrument to guide the continuing response under the Convention to the global commitments, and a reflection of the increasing understanding that gender equality is an important prerequisite for sustainable development and for the advancement of the objectives of the Convention. We need to step up implementation and accountability. The Global Gender Gap Report 2020 identified economic participation and opportunity as the second largest gap and estimate that it will take another 267.6 years to close political empowerment, being the largest of the 4 gaps tracked. The GBF needs gender-specific indicators, data disaggregated by sex, age, and other demographic factors where possible. Finally, gender equality and justice as a standalone goal target would help ensure effective implementation of the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action, raise accountability, and support a whole of society and human rights-based approach to the implementation of the GBF. We have our comments for the GPA already submitted on the 14th with textual suggestions, and we thank you for the floor.
Thank you, women. And I continue with the major stakeholder groups, a representative of IPLCs. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much. I'm speaking on behalf of the Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. Indigenous peoples, the local communities, women, and youth are all contributing to a great extent in the achievement of the goals of this convention. However, we face challenges to be able to continue with our work because we are suffering more as a result of the loss of biodiversity. That we depend very much on the spoiling of our lands, criminalization, murders. There are situations where we have no rights over the lands and the resources that we have retained ancestrally. The network of Indigenous women on biodiversity has worked over the course of 23 years, contributing in an effective way to the implementation of this convention. The new challenges require a responsible gender focus that acknowledges and respects the contribution made by women, girls and youth in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and it should be respective of the cultural side. It must promote practices that strengthen our effective participation and the implementation of the post-2020 framework. We would like to offer the following suggestions. On item 2, after governments, we'd like to include Indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, and the rest unchanged. As far as the gender plan of action, in the first paragraph, after the word participation, replace significant by full. In the fourth line, after marginalized, persecuted, and criminalized, and the rest unchanged. In expected results, after benefits, we should add derived from the use of. Before genetic resources, add and traditional knowledge associated to genetic resources. 2.2, third action, we should add Indigenous before the word women and then rest unchanged. In C, add Indigenous before women, rest unchanged. Point 3.2, indicative actions B, add based on the free, prior, and informed consent. After the traditional knowledge, rest unchanged. In indicative actions B, 3.3, after guise, add culturally appropriate where necessary. In C of the same point, we should include culturally appropriate. This is the time to establish the conditions that will make it possible for us to live in harmony with Mother Earth in the same way amongst ourselves with equality. Women, especially Indigenous women, are the ones who have blazed this path. And we would ask the parties to support us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, IPLCs. If I continue with my list of major stakeholder groups, I see no request on the floor from the youth, but I understand NGO 809 speaking on behalf of CBD Alliance. That's correct? CBD Alliance, you have the floor.
Dear Madam Chair, I speak on behalf of AVAS. AVAS welcomes that the gender plan mentions and considers Indigenous women as the relevant actors they are in biodiversity, while being the most vulnerable of all. AVAS emphasizes that ensuring women and girls' empowerment must be guaranteed, not only promoted. The plan of action should be comprehensive and clear to all, therefore listing precise actions to be considered, promoted, and ensured. Along such actions, we highlight opportunities and strengthening of the informed, full and effective participation and leadership of women. We also need a stronger focus on areas such as women's access, control and ownership, but also on access to information and technology. Enabling women, especially Indigenous women, to be legal recipients of financial, technological, and capacity building support. Therefore, we strongly support the inclusion of Target 22 in the GBF text, as suggested by several parties such as Costa Rica, Mexico, Tanzania, Benin, Guatemala, Chile, and others, guaranteeing equitable access to benefits and informed and effective participation of women at all levels of policy and decision-making related to biodiversity. We stand with the comments of the Women Caucus and the Indigenous Caucus. Lastly, indicators for any monitoring framework related to actions agreed for the next decade and further should be gender sensitive, and therefore, data should be disaggregated by sex. Avaz will send our comments in writing with particular text-added suggestions for parties to consider. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I will now open the floor for interventions from observers. And please note you have 2 minutes for your statements. And I will first give the floor to UHCHR and then UN Women. UHCHR, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Ben Schachter, speaking on behalf of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Others have said well and more eloquently much of what I could. OHCHR does wish to express its appreciation for the effective integration of women's rights in the gender plan, the draft gender plan of action. Women's rights are human rights. The Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and other human rights treaties should guide and inform effective action under the Convention. We wish to note, as others have, that a plan of action must be supported by adequate resources and effective means of implementation, and also to express our support for a standalone target on women's rights and gender equality. We believe that this can help orient and support implementation of the plan of action. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to UN Women. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. UN Women would like to call upon parties to adopt a comprehensive and progressive post-2020 gender plan of action as an integral part of the COP15 decision. However, it is important to note that for the gender plan of action to fulfill its aim of supporting a gender-responsive global biodiversity framework, it is imperative that it is not perceived as a standalone document, but that it is duly reflected within the various elements of the framework and its implementation support mechanisms. These include the review of the national biodiversity strategies and action plans, the templates and guidance for the NBSAPs and national reports, the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development, and the financial mechanism, so that key capacity building and financing needs for the gender-responsive implementation of the global biodiversity framework are adequately addressed. We are also pleased to see so much support from parties for a specific target on gender, which we do believe would be extremely important in ensuring the gender-responsive implementation of the framework. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no more requests for the floor. Thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. We have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on agenda item 5 on gender plan of action. We have had a very rich discussion and some good suggestions. I propose to establish a contact group under this agenda item. The co-chairs of the contact group will be Mr. Scott Wilson of Canada and Ms. Melissa Laverde of Colombia. The contact group will hold its first meeting on Saturday, 19th March from 7:30 to 10:30 p.m. Let us now turn to the second issue for consideration under this agenda item. Distinguished delegates. Sorry, hold on a minute. Sorry to come back, just to clarify, because the Secretariat reminded me that, as you know, we have very little time at this session, so it will have its only session on Saturday evening. So this is a chance to take the discussion. The contact group will only have one session that will take place on gender. The contact group on gender will only have one session, and that will take place, as I said, tomorrow at 7:30 to 10:30 p.m., the evening session tomorrow. I hope that has been clear. Thanks a lot. Let us now turn. Distinguished delegates, we now focus our discussion on the communications plan for the post-2020 period, and we will conduct a first reading for this issue under this agenda item. I will give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documents on this item. So, Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In Decision 1434, the Conference of the Parties decided that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework should be accompanied by an inspirational and motivating 2030 mission as a stepping stone toward the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, which would be supported by a coherent, comprehensive, and innovative communication strategy. The present document before you, SBI-3/4/Add1/Rev1, sets out the framework for developing this communication strategy. This document is meant to replace the framework for communication strategy approved in Decision 1322. The present version has been reviewed by the Informal Advisory Committee on Communication, Education, and Public Awareness, and by communications experts participating in the Biodiversity Communications Flotilla, including representatives of a variety of stakeholders in the biodiversity policy area. The document begins with a short presentation of the relationship between behavior change and communication and an outline of the elements of the strategy. The final strategy will be adjusted in accordance with the final agreed text of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the relevant decision of the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Subsequently, the strategy will be kept under review as further described in Section 3 of the document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I would now like to open the floor for interventions on Agenda Item 5 and the Communications Plan. I will start with regional groups, followed by parties, other governments, and observers. And I encourage you to keep your statements short and concise. So we will now move to interventions from regional groups. The only regional group that I can see on my list is the EU and its member states. And please note you will have 6 minutes for your statement, 6 minutes for the regional groups. The EU and its member states, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the communication strategy for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which we warmly welcome. Communication is a key pillar to ensure the understanding, acceptance, and implementation at all levels of the post-2020 framework by parties, stakeholders, and the general public. We stress the importance of further improvements and alignment with the wording agreed under other SBI agenda items, such as capacity building, planning, reporting, and review mechanisms. Moreover, we underline the need for avoiding additional reporting burden, and communication should be covered by the template for national reports negotiated under SBI Item 9. Regarding Chapter 5 on audiences, we favor some reordering for coherence with common practice. On the idea, the proposal for a new website, in our understanding, it aims at communication towards a global audience and would not be used as a reporting platform. Reporting by parties will be done through the CBD clearinghouse mechanism. Finally, we recognize the importance of Chapter 10 on resources, but here we favor a more general language and address relevant details under SBI Agenda Item 6. We will hand in our comments on the framework on the communication strategy in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, EU and its member states. And I see no more requests on the floor from the regions. So we will now move to interventions from parties. And please note you will have 3 minutes for your statements. And I see on my screen Costa Rica, you asked for the floor. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're grateful for having established a communication strategy which raises awareness and also seeks to find solutions within the global biodiversity framework. We need long-range basis for exchanging information, and we support strategies so that we can multiply our message, which also is important for public awareness, a work that to be implemented after COP15. It will be also very important to communicate concerning the role of indigenous peoples and local communities as well as women in the area of biodiversity and in the implementation of the convention. Finally, we need to include a mechanism for open access and analysis, recognizing the important role of social networks and digital tools. In paragraph 7, we would like to add the importance of the provisions concerning communications, education, knowledge, and adoption of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Our communication plan must be coordinated with this. In paragraph 8.6, we need to change the phrase and the elaboration of information, of permanent information, campaigns, expositions in museums, international campaigns and webinars. I thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Bolivia, followed by St. Kitts and then Argentina. Bolivia, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bolivia believes that having a strategy for communications is fundamental to implement the decisions within the objectives of the convention. However, we have some specific comments in order to enrich this discussion. We believe important to include in paragraph 13C the living in harmony with nature vision, and in the paragraph 14, participation of indigenous peoples, women and youth. Concerning chapter 4, we believe it is important to speak not just about the values of biodiversity, but also to mention the multiple values of biodiversity, and not just mention the knowledge of indigenous peoples, but also the system of knowledge and the cosmic vision of indigenous peoples in the context of various values and visions, so that we can support and develop sustainable development, also providing support where it is needed. Concerning target C, we believe that it is important to stress the welcoming, the celebrating of biodiversity, but also to establish an International Day for Mother Nature to support the various values of biodiversity. And in paragraph 28, we would like to sensitize the support of local biodiversity outlooks, also to communicate the contribution of indigenous peoples to the conservation and replenishment of biodiversity. We believe that it would be important for the Secretariat to hold in communication campaigns, also in connection with the General Assembly sessions, within the vision of living in harmony with Mother Nature. In concerning target D, paragraph 41b, we believe it is important to sustain approaches based on ecosystems and not based on market decisions, so that we can live in harmony with. That also concerns the indigenous people. Madam Co-Chair, I'm going to send my proposals in writing, but I believe it is very important to reflect the rights to living in harmony with Mother Nature. That should be also reflected. Thank you.
Thank you, Bolivia. I now give the floor to St. Kitts and Nevis, and followed by Argentina and Colombia. St. Kitts and Nevis, we have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. The delegation from St. Kitts and Nevis thanks the Secretariat for preparing the communication strategy for the Global Biodiversity Framework. Our delegation supports the communication strategy and recognizes its significant role in the implementation of the post-2020 biodiversity framework. In the interest of time, St. Kitts and Nevis believes that the strategy should be supported by adequate resources and the means of implementation, as well as it should be integrated into the relevant monitoring framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, St. Kitts and Nevis. I now give the floor to Argentina, followed by Colombia, then UK. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. La Argentina agradece.
Argentina is grateful for the possibility to offer suggestions concerning a new document concerning the communication strategy that should accompany the global biodiversity framework. First, would like to recall that we made a statement in the first part of our session concerning the communication strategy that should be based on key consensus messages by the parties. In that sense, we appreciate that most messages proposed by the Secretariat are correct and would like to suggest some others. These have to do with the importance of the implementation of the global framework, not leaving anyone behind, the necessity to increase cooperation at world level to stop the loss of biodiversity, and the coordination of the global framework with the sustainable development goals. In addition, we believe that the strategy should be mainly aiming to communicate the content of the global framework accessibly for people. In this sense, the elements of the strategy should be easy to identify at the global level. For instance, in our view, the Secretariat doesn't have a role to play concerning the change of the behavior of individuals. Finally, there is a number of elements of the strategy that are based on the draft global framework or other documents under negotiation. They have not been agreed upon yet, and that's why we propose that they should be eliminated, or at least put them in parentheses. Argentina believes that we need a communication strategy that would send a message concerning the content of our agreed global framework, and would like to cooperate to stop the loss of biodiversity, and we sent our comments and put suggestions in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Argentina. I now give the floor to Colombia, followed by UK, and then Brazil. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We appreciate this draft recommendation and consider that it's a good starting point for more detailed discussions. We especially appreciate the efforts for the outreach and for raising awareness of the GBF in relation to the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. We consider that there is need for further clarification in terms of proposals, such as the engagement of the communications flotilla, as well as having a reference for coordinated work, especially with other biodiversity-related MEAs, in order to broaden and strengthen even further our key messages, in addition to giving more visibility to the collaborative work amongst the CBD and these different conventions and agreements. We look forward to the updated progress report on all the proposed activities and initiatives, taking a close look at the financial strategy that will support all new and ongoing communication campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia. I now give the floor to UK, followed by Brazil and then Belize. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We thank the Executive Secretary and the Secretariat for all the work to date on communications for the Convention and its protocols, and for the suggestions presented in the note on communication for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Clear and effective communications and public awareness raising will be critical for generating a whole-of-society approach to implementing the GBF. We are fully supportive of a global strategy and have the following comments on the framework in document CBD/SBI/3/4/Add1/Rev1, which we will also submit in writing. We note that it is currently proposed that CEPA, IAC, and relevant actors will create a detailed international strategy document immediately following COP15, with no further input from parties. We believe that parties and other relevant stakeholders should have further opportunity to comment on and shape the strategy, either before or after COP15, to ensure full participation in its implementation. There is currently a large reporting burden on parties for the post-2020 GBF, and we therefore believe parties should be invited to consider creating national versions of the global strategy without being instructed to. For many parties, the strategy will need to provide adequate guidance on communications for the post-2020 GBF as a standalone document. In an effort to minimize the reporting burden on parties, we would also support reporting on communications activities every 4 years, in line with current national reporting, rather than every 2 years. Lastly, there are several paragraphs where the intent is not quite clear. We would therefore ask the Secretariat to address these and other comments and provide an updated document for further deliberation by parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. I now give the floor to Brazil, followed by Belize and then Sri Lanka. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's very good to see you here in person. You can count on our full support. Madam Chair, Brazil is fully committed to an ambitious, realistic, and successful post-2020 global biodiversity framework. For this, it's important to recognize the importance of the means of implementation, capacity building, and communication. Therefore, Brazil recognizes the need for communication and awareness. However, it's necessary to recognize that the content of the document CBD-SBI-3 for Add1/Rev1 is a result of 3 misunderstandings. First, regarding the role of the Secretariat, the Executive Secretary is not a primus inter pares, as the document appears to indicate. The Secretariat was established by the parties to perform functions determined by the Conference of Parties. Therefore, I recall our statement delivered in the SBI virtual session of last year, when we clearly stated that the communication strategies and activities for the post-2020 GBF must be based on a party-driven process. Parties are the protagonists of CBD. They will implement the GBF. And for these reasons, any communication strategy must retain the primary responsibility and role of the parties. Brazil recognizes and it's grateful for the support the Secretariat provides to parties. but it's important to stress the supporting role the Secretariat has. Second, regarding the scope and mandate, its relationship with other regarding the CBD scope and mandate, its relationship with other conventions and other multilateral agreements, the GBF, and concepts used throughout the document. As this is a very extensive list, my delegation will submit written comments on the document, but I want to highlight 3 issues. The text should be fully consistent with multilateral agreed language and commitments, in particular Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, avoiding encroaching on the mandates of other agreements and prejudicing ongoing negotiations in different fora, and avoiding using many concepts, terms, and language that are not multilaterally agreed or are still under discussion in appropriate fora. CBD Secretariat must align their message to the scope, mandate, and objectives of the Convention. Third, regarding the parties' capacities and use of resources, the suggestion of national reports on communication does not take into account the lack of human and other resources to implement and report on different activities. Furthermore, all resources should be directed to implement the priority actions in developing countries to achieve the objectives of the Convention and implement the GBF. To conclude, Brazil stresses its deep concern with the way the Secretariat has been communicating its activities and, in particular, the GBF. Some messages convey the idea that the targets under negotiation have already been agreed upon. We urge the Secretariat to act responsibly, refraining from prejudicing the ongoing negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I now give the floor to Belize, followed by Sri Lanka, and then India. Belize, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Belize applauds the work of the Secretariat in the development of a communication plan for the post-2020 biodiversity framework, as this plan shall support outreach, awareness, and mainstreaming of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework across all stakeholder groups. We are, however, aware that increasing understanding, awareness, and appreciation of the values of biodiversity, including the associated knowledge and approaches used by indigenous people and local communities, is not easy and a very costly task. As such, like other parties, we support the prioritization of financial mechanisms, partnerships with academic and national media, capacity support, knowledge platforms, and the rebranding and messaging of biodiversity, which are all critical for successful achievements of actions associated with national communication plans. Our communication plans must be aligned with our national context, be written in our national tongues and dialects, and must be communicated from the lowest to the highest socio-political levels of our countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Belize. I now give the floor to Sri Lanka, followed by India, and then Mexico. Sri Lanka, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sri Lanka welcomes this important document and congratulates the Secretariat for this fundamental document. In order to implement the strategies and actions outlined here, we wish to emphasize following points. 1. Open access to resources and data repositories where possible to develop awareness material. 2nd, access to digital platforms. 3rd, sharing not just the knowledge, skills, but also the sentiments to biodiversity, which we consider as very important. 4th, empowering women, girls, and indigenous communities on communication skills. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Sri Lanka. I now give the floor to India, followed by Mexico, and then Canada. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India would like to thank the Secretariat for bringing the document on communication on post-2020 global biodiversity framework. India is of view that communication strategies on DSI issues are also to be included in the communication document of post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which will be helpful to all the parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. I now give the floor to Mexico, followed by Canada, and then Uganda. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mexico acknowledges the work that was done for the strategy on communication. Without a doubt, the effective implementation of the new framework will be crucial and will transmit to our communities the importance of preserving biodiversity and recovering biodiversity. Unfortunately, we still haven't received the attention of the general public, as was done by the Convention on Climate Change, for example. We need not a slogan, but a clear message, a concise message, brief as well, aimed at the general public, such as the target of 1.5 degrees for climate change, in order to make it clear that the loss of biodiversity is a problem that is just as important as global warming, and it needs everyone's attention. So we should go hand in hand with education, strengthening access information, which will make it possible to put us in a position where it's fundamental for the world to come back and to see biodiversity and the link with our health. And I think without a doubt a communication strategy will make it possible for us to reach areas where we have not been able to carry this message. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mexico. I now give the floor to Canada, followed by Uganda, and then DR Congo. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Canada believes that communication will be key to promote the mission of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We thank the Secretariat for drafting the framework for a communication strategy. Canada generally agree with the intent of the document. That being said, we have a few comments on the strategy. The first one is about how the document proposed to link the communication strategy to the NBSAP and the monitoring framework. Like others have mentioned, we are concerned with reporting burden. In our view, the NBSAP should focus on the goal and targets of the GBF. We believe that broadening the scope may impede the ability of parties to develop and update their plan in a timely manner. Further, it's our understanding that the monitoring framework will measure progress against the goal and targets of the GBF, and that it will not necessarily capture the means of implementation related to the GBF. As a result, we do not believe that additional indicators related to awareness and behavioral change should be added to the monitoring framework for each target. Our preference would be to use the component and complementary indicators that will be selected for Target 20 to support monitoring of the communication strategy. This would help to mainstream monitoring efforts. Secondly, while we recognize that the document will have to be reviewed following the adoption of the post-2020 GBF, we would prefer to call it a strategy rather than a framework to be consistent with the decision 1434, since the strategy will be reviewed following COP15 as outlined in the document. Lastly, Canada believes that the strategy should be costed to help parties take an informed decision on the document. We will submit our textual proposal in writing through the online platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I now give the floor to Uganda, followed by DR Congo, and then Peru. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Uganda is speaking on behalf of Africa. We wish to express our appreciation to the Secretariat for the effort in drafting the document before us. We welcome the draft communications for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We view this framework as a work in progress pending the finalization of the GBF prior to submission for adoption by the parties at COP15. With that said, Madam Chair, we appreciate the assurance that the global communication strategy will go beyond awareness raising to enable transformative and behavioral change. We further support the idea and tone that connects to people's aspirations and conveys a sense of optimism in the current atmosphere of doom and gloom. We are particularly encouraged by the reference to a focus on priority actions to be taken by all stakeholders to address the current crisis of halting the unprecedented loss of biodiversity. The importance of achieving equity as part of the process towards the 2050 vision for biodiversity is a most welcome key messaging, and its inclusion in the draft communication needs further elaboration. Madam Chair, we look forward to more detailed interaction and engagement, including textual amendments on the substance of the document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. I now give the floor to DR Congo, followed by Peru and then Malawi. DR Congo, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Madam Chair. We'd like to thank the Secretariat of the Convention for the work that has been done, and we support the statement made by Uganda on behalf of Africa. However, the communication strategy is not something that we can understand easily at this stage. It doesn't allow us to clarify how the implementation of the framework will actually be carried out. And to this effect, the DR Congo, we believe that believes that the document we're looking at would require an effective implementation for the post-2020 GBF. We have to avoid mistakes that were made in the past. This is why the DR Congo supports the idea that several parts of this document should remain in square brackets. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, DR Congo. I now give the floor to Peru, followed by Malawi, and then Central African Republic. Peru, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Many thanks, Madam Chair. The delegation of Peru would like to highlight how important the post-2020 GBF is, and that it requires a significant communication strategy, which is based on a strategy that would provide a structure for coordination of all relevant stakeholders from the local grassroots level all the way to the global level. Also, the communication strategy will help to transform the human behavior to support biological diversity and the equitable participation also in the benefits of biodiversity. We'd like to highlight the need to integrate into this process the active participation of indigenous peoples and local communities. The experts in education, communication, youth, and representatives of various types of media, emphasizing the local ones. Finally, we support the statement made by Belize about the translation of dialects and languages of these peoples and ethnic groups. And for this, we would require support from various organizations and bodies to be able to do this work, making everyone aware of this. We shall make the specific contributions which we believe are appropriate to this document. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peru. I now give the floor to Malawi, followed by Central African Republic, and then Egypt. Malawi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi would like to express its gratitude to the Secretariat for putting together this communication strategy for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Malawi supports the statement by Uganda on behalf of Africa. The communication strategy will not only raise the biodiversity profile globally, but it will also provide the much-needed awareness and capacity for different stakeholders to engage in biodiversity conservation. It is a well-known fact that unless one is aware of the importance of biodiversity and the ecosystem services it provides for human well-being, it is much difficult to participate in conservation. Malawi is looking forward to see a comprehensive communication strategy that will equally cover the 3 objectives of the Convention and the Cartagena Protocol, and also the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. It is our wish that adequate financial resources be provided to ensure effective implementation of the strategy both at global and national level. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. I now give the floor to Central African Republic, followed by Egypt and then Benin. Central African Republic, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Central African Republic thanks the Secretariat for this communication strategy. We support to this effect the statement made by Uganda on behalf of the African group, but also the statement made by Sri Lanka about the question of indigenous communities and local communities. We'd like to suggest under Target A, we would like to suggest that women and youth should be integrated into this goal, and we would like to suggest that it should read as follows: improve the value of biodiversity, including the knowledge and values and associated approaches from the indigenous peoples, local communities, as well as women and youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Central African Republic. I now give the floor to Egypt, followed by Benin, and then yes, I think that's the last. Nigeria, yes. Egypt, followed by Benin, and then Nigeria. Egypt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Egypt aligns itself with Uganda on behalf of Africa, and therefore we support this important document. However, we have several questions. First, what would be the proposed cost for implementing this strategy, especially if it will be part of post-2020 GBF? The second question, when we talk about the communication language, how do you communicate with decision makers on GBF and communicate with people who are in local communities?
How do you communicate with all of these people? This is very important. And وبالتالي
And therefore, the messages here should need some modification. Third, regarding GBF and the transformative changes that are required, these communications should be felt by everybody, all the stakeholders. Nobody should be left behind when we speak about sustainable development and when we speak about the post-2020 period. Therefore, we have to look into these very sensitive issues, because the process of communication we have been discussing since CBD came to life. The messages may differ from one region to another, and therefore this requires some further study. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Egypt. I now have 3 more parties on my list: Benin, Nigeria, and Algeria. So Benin, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My thanks to the Secretariat for having prepared this communication strategy document. We align ourselves on the Uganda position, representative of the Africa Group, and we support the priority actions contained in this document. The convention is also often criticized about not having strong communication compared with other conventions, of course. Benin notes that this document responds to this vision because it goes beyond just making people aware. Benin believes that it will be extremely important to have a specific target proposed to better assess the change in the behavior of the stakeholders, a bit like was suggested by Canada. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Benin. I now see on my list, I have Nigeria, Namibia, and then Ecuador. Nigeria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nigeria wishes to support the statement by Uganda on behalf of Africa. Nigeria considers this communication strategy as a package pending the final adoption of the GBF. We support the proposal that we retain the bracket as communicated during the online session. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria. And I now give the floor to Namibia, followed by Ecuador and then Algeria. Namibia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Namibia would like to associate itself with the statement by Uganda, but we're also asking for the floor to respond to what we heard Mexico saying about the need for an easily communicable apex target in the GBF that would correspond to the 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees in the Paris Agreement. And we have submitted text to that effect, which would basically look at the percentage of the world that is under sustainable participatory ecosystem-based management. We think it should be 100%. We think that that's a better target overall, and we think that that is something that can be communicated quite clearly. So that the whole world will understand that we need to manage the whole of the planet in a biodiversity-friendly way. We think it's going to be very, very difficult to communicate the GBF, and we're not convinced that there seems to be the current favorite soundbite for communication seems to be 30 by 30. And we're not convinced that that 30 by 30 is actually the best target, although we accept that it's a good target to have for protected areas. But the CBD is about much more than protected areas. It's actually a sustainable development instrument with 3 different pillars that hold up the sky. And so we would like to suggest to colleagues that when we develop the GBF, thinking about an apex goal like putting all of the planet under biodiversity-friendly, inclusive, sustainable management by 2030 would be relatively easy to communicate and would encompass the totality of what is involved, because the ecosystem approach does take account of social factors, of economic factors, as well as conservation factors. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Namibia. And I go on with my list of parties, Ecuador, followed by Algeria, and then Suriname. Ecuador, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks, Madam Chair. Ecuador would like to support what was stated by delegate of Peru and other delegations who have spoken in favor of the strategy. We believe that it is crucially important for this communication strategy to be implemented and translated and disseminated in the various languages of the United Nations. And there's a lot of work that we still need to do within our countries at the local level, given the fact that we have a diversity of local communities, indigenous peoples. So we think that this access to information must be facilitated, and facilitated, as was said here, for the decision makers, but also to our local communities and to our indigenous peoples as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ecuador. I now give the floor to Algeria, followed by Suriname, and then Trinidad and Tobago. Algeria, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Algeria would like to express its thanks to the Secretariat for preparing this document. Algeria supports the statement made by Uganda. Communication is something that must take place before, during, and after the framework. So an assessment needs to be done over the course of several stages. The communication strategy and awareness must go hand in hand with an evaluation of indicators, and there should be a financing plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Algeria. I'll now give the floor to Suriname, followed by Trinidad and Tobago. Suriname, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. And we are delighted to see you in good health in the room. The Republic of Suriname underscores the contribution of Belize and Paraguay. With the country with a national language that is not a UN language and different languages and dialects spoken locally, it is imperative that support is given from various sources to further disseminate the message to all local groups so biodiversity values and are greatly understood and agreed upon at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you, Suriname. And I only have two parties now on my list, Trinidad and Tobago and then Norway. So I give first the floor to Trinidad and Tobago. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Trinidad and Tobago thanks the Secretariat for the work that has done thus far to develop the strategy as seen in CBD/SBI-3/4 Add 1 Rev 1. We are fully cognizant of the importance of the Communication and Awareness Plan for the achievement of the 2050 Vision for Biodiversity and consider it a starting point to further build awareness to the general public on the post-2020 GBF, and ultimately on the importance of the need to conserve and sustainably use biodiversity. We concur with the Belizean delegate and with our colleague from St. Vincent and Grenadines and St. Kitts and Nevis that increasing understanding and awareness of the appreciation of the values of biodiversity and all stakeholders is a very costly task. As such, like other small island developing states, we support the prioritization of financial mechanisms and partnerships for the successful accomplishment of actions associated with national communication plans. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And finally on my list for parties, Norway. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to pick up on the idea from Namibia on the 100%, which I find is an interesting one. So in this regard, we would like to sort of communicate as well that the members of the high-level panel on a sustainable ocean economy have committed to sustainably manage 100% of their national waters by 2025 and encourage all ocean states to do the same by 2030. So this is just an example that the sort of angle of 100% sustainable management of the planet is sort of gaining traction and might be an interesting sort of angle to use in communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. So I see no more requests from parties for the floor. And as we do not have any more requests from parties, I will invite other governments. I see no requests from other governments. So I will then continue and invite organizations, and I will start with inviting intervention by representatives on major stakeholder groups. and each statement should not exceed 3 minutes. Okay. So I start with IPLCs, and then women, and then youth. IPLCs, you have the floor. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, IIFB. The IIFB applauds the progress that has been achieved so far on the global communication strategy and welcomes the further inclusion of language on indigenous peoples and local communities that highlights increasing understanding, awareness, and appreciation of the values of biodiversity, including the associated knowledge, values, and approaches used by IPLCs. However, to achieve a more inclusive, transformative change, more needs to be done. Building on this development, the IIFB suggests the following addition. In Para 8, we support the inclusion of IPLCs and propose the addition of women and youth. We propose the explicit inclusion of IPLCs, women and youth in Para 9, rather than being in the general mention as partners such as those in the communication flotilla. The global communication strategy should also reflect the landmark resolution of the United Nations in recognizing access to a healthy and sustainable environment as a human right. And in line with the UN resolution on the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, the global communication strategy must also consider development of communication materials that include cultural and language diversity. We have submitted this text proposal in writing, and we would request party support on our text. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, IPLCs, and I now give the floor to women, followed by youth. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Forwarding from what our colleagues from IFB have already presented, for page 3, section 3 on scope and the purpose of the strategy, para 13, we would like to add after stakeholders, women and youth. In the same para 13, sub-para B, after businesses, citizens, youth, we would again like the addition of women. In paragraph 15, the biodiversity communication fortella has been mentioned. Our recommendation is that the biodiversity communication fortella should be composed of representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, and not just be invited only when they need to contribute to, as has been mentioned in the footnote 9, which says some elements and not others. On para 58, under section G, sub-para 50, we would like the deletion of underdevelopment. This is to draw, the paragraph says, should complement and draw upon the post-2020 gender plan of action underdevelopment. We want the underdevelopment deleted. And after UN Women, we also would like to say, and women's organizations and networks, including Women's Caucus. Lastly, on paragraph 13 on section C, on champions, messengers of peace and goodwill ambassadors, besides trying to recognize the contributions of businesses and governments, I think the rights holders as women, youth, and indigenous peoples and local communities should be added here. On paragraph 14, section 7 on key messaging, once again, to see the link of the development of the post-2020 gender plan of action, we would like, after the sustainable development, the added text is, be guided by the post-2020 gender plan of action and the conclusion of the 5th edition of the GBO and the end of the sentence. We would like party support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, women. And sorry. Okay, thank you for your contribution. I will now give the floor to youth, and they will be the last observer that can speak on this agenda item because we don't have much time. So I give the floor to the youth, for their statement, and then that will be the last statement. Youth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Global Youth Biodiversity Network welcomes work that has been done to develop a communication strategy that engages parties, right holders, and stakeholders to engage values, beliefs, and attitudes in a transformative way. However, we believe that the communication strategy puts too much emphasis on targeting and engaging those who lead a life that needs more resources than planet can provide. We must recognize that a big part of the human populations, including indigenous people and local communities, has a lifestyle that allows them to live within planetary boundaries. Strategies should therefore be differentiated with regards to them and should rather seek to defend their rights, to seek equity, and to support the persistence of the cultural and sustainable lives. Besides showcasing biodiversity initiatives, strongly should also aim to make strongly visible and communication projects that they successfully and beautifully implement already, and to help them strengthen indigenous-led and community-led communication channels. We also believe that education people to understand systemic issues, as well as the interconnectedness of the environmental and social crisis, should be at the very core of the strategy. It is crucial to not only encourage people to take action in their personal life when necessary, but also to allow them to be active citizens in their communities in a relevant and inclusive way, through an educational that are lifelong, quality, holistic, critical, and celebrates diversity. In other words, transformative. Furthermore, we need communication to be accessible for everyone according to their needs and circumstances, including to disabled persons. Visual and auditory and cognitive impairments, among others, must not be a barrier to receive and understand the messages of this communication strategy. Therefore, we need to diversify the platforms, formats, and media of diffusion, as well as adapt the message in a language that is accessible, inclusive, and culturally appropriate. Finally, we strongly believe that continuing to allow communication that is not in line with the goal of living in harmony with nature will weaken the transformative shift that we were trying to achieve. Harmful communication includes advertisement of unsustainable products or messages that showcase or promote a culture that is not in line with objectives of the post-2020 GBF. Regulating those is part of the no-harm first strategy, because without strongly regulating this message, this communication strategy will have a limited impact and clearly won't be enough to live in harmony with nature by 2050. We have proposals in line with these points, which we'll submit together with our writing statement through this website for consideration by the parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Youth. And that will be our last speaker. I apologize, we don't have time to take more statements from observers, but I think we have had a very good discussion so far. So we have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on agenda item 5 and the communications plan. We've had a very rich discussion and some good suggestions, and I see that we have a lot of common understanding. I will now prepare a conference room paper with the help of a secretariat. In keeping with our proposed schedule of meetings, we'll take up agenda item 5 to review the CRP in the coming days. So please refer to the timeline in the annex to update the scenario note of this session. And as always, check the Secretariat website. Let us now turn to next agenda item. Distinguished delegates, we will now move to agenda item 8, cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives. You will recall that we made progress on this item at the first part of our SBI-3 and began a first reading. At this meeting, we will resume our first reading under agenda item 8. You will also recall the following documents were prepared to facilitate the deliberations on agenda item 8. Document CBD, SBI-3 10, on cooperation with other conventions, international organizations and initiatives. Document CBD, SBI-3 Inf. 31, which provides a report on activities, concerning cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives during the present intersessional period, and document CBD SBI-3 Inf 32, which provides an update on progress in implementing actions to enhance synergies among biodiversity-related conventions at the international level. I would also like to note that document CBD WGAJ 11.5 on options for positive elements of work on the links between nature and culture in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which has been made available in accordance with a request in Decision 14/30. Before I open the floor, I would like to remind you that there was a first reading in May, June, last year. So please, you don't need to repeat your statements already done. I repeat, you don't need to repeat what you said last year, because they are already considered and they will be reconsidered in the CRP. So please only, and think about the time, please only add new elements. I know that there was a request for resumed first reading, but we don't need to repeat what we did. So with this introduction, I will now like to resume our first reading and open the floor for interventions on agenda item 8. I will start with regional groups, followed by parties, other governments, and observers. And yes, I encourage you to keep your statement short and concise, and please you don't need to repeat what you said last year. So we will now move to interventions from regional groups. And I see on my list that the EU, speaking on behalf of EU and its member states, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the European Union and its member states. Good cooperation and synergies are crucial for all work on biodiversity, not least the effective implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I'm very happy that the Bern II workshop last year confirmed a very broad common understanding. To be brief, as you asked, I would like to make 6 remarks. First one is the need for cooperation and synergies, which goes beyond biodiversity-related MEAs and includes all relevant conventions, multilateral agreements and organizations, for instance, the Technical and Waste Conventions. Second, existing formal processes, such as the Biodiversity Liaison Group, Informal Advisory Group on Synergies, and the Environment Management Group, must orient their work towards the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Third, joint programs with other relevant multilateral agreements may help improve the ownership and joint implementation of the global framework. Fourth, if new cooperation mechanisms are needed for the coherent and cooperative implementation of the framework, the EU and its member states agree that this should preferably build upon already established processes, mechanisms, or bodies, adapting, if needed, their scope and modalities. 5, we furthermore propose to include a reference to a mechanism that enables dialogue between representatives of the intergovernmental bodies of related conventions and organizations through representatives of these bodies as a follow-up of the earlier Bern I and Bern II meetings. Finally, synergies and cooperation at national and regional levels will also remain of utmost importance for implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework, including in the context of the NBSAP's capacity building, monitoring, resource mobilization, and reporting. For the latter, the data and reporting tool DART will greatly help synergies for reporting. We will upload our statement and our textual proposal for the draft recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, EU and its member states. And I still would like to see if there are any regions who would like to speak. Ghana, are you asking the floor for a region? Yeah, a region. Okay, then can you please, 6 minutes? Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ghana speaks on behalf of Africa. And on behalf of Africa, we wish to thank the Secretariat and to support the report produced by the Secretariat on the cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives. We appreciate the work done in organizing consultation workshops for the biodiversity-related conventions, particularly during the drafting of the GBF to ensure synergy and complementarity of actions. Africa, therefore, aligns itself with the conclusions listed in the document and notes that an effective cooperation among biodiversity-related conventions will go a long way to reduce duplication and ensure cost-effective implementation of joint programs that will be proposed in the implementation of the GBF. However, we wish to note the following. We wish to support the position of the EU that beyond conventions related to the CBD, the process be extended to other multilateral environmental agreements, especially the Treaty on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Watercourses and International Lakes, and request that they also be engaged in future discussions. 2, we also note the development of the DAT reporting tool for MAEs and its rollout to national authorities. We look forward to many more parties being trained on the use of this tool and to facilitate reporting within the various biodiversity-related conventions. We also anticipate more capacity building programs, particularly for national statistical departments, the research and academic institutions in these countries to collect relevant transformation data in the form and shape that will ease reporting and comparison of activities. 3, Africa is also of the view that the biodiversity-related convention liaison group should be established within regional blocks, while member states create their own liaisons with other biodiversity-related conventions at the national and subnational level to achieve the objectives of the cooperation. This will facilitate dialogue across the conventions and garner support for implementation of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And we want to emphasize the need for regional processes. 4, Africa calls on parties to review their MBSAPs and requests that CBD focal points work together with other convention focal points in line with the new thinking of the GBF, and calls on other conventions to come on board to make the desired impacts. 5, Africa wishes to draw the attention to the successful support of the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation through the implementation of the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, and request that this remains firmly as part of the GBF. Finally, Africa wishes to state that there should be a firm statement on cooperation with biodiversity-related conventions, international organizations, and initiatives in the GBF. I thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ghana, on behalf of Africa. I will now move to interventions from parties. And if there are in intervention, each statement only 3 minutes. And I start by giving the floor to Switzerland, followed by Cambodia, and then South Africa. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can be quite brief because Switzerland can align itself to the statement made by the European Union and also by Ghana on behalf of the African group. We are very pleased to see a rising awareness that we have to strengthen our cooperation, and for this we need some structure and some instruments. We therefore support the suggestion that DART should be also somewhere reflected in the GBF and this cooperation as an important topic. I have two suggestions to make, a concrete suggestion. One is with regard to paragraph 4, where the Executive Secretary is invited to prepare a proposal for the consideration of the Conference of the Parties, which we would support in principle, but we would first like to also see reflected a reference to the Bern process, as this has been said also by the European Union. And then we have a question to the Secretariat, a formal one. If we decide in this paper, CRP, that the Secretariat should do something for the next COP, then I see a problem. Because the CRP is a recommendation to the COP, and finally the COP will decide. So it will be too late to prepare something. So if the Secretariat could offer us a way how we could now already ask the Secretariat to prepare something so that at the COP we have the documents ready and can decide on it. And the last point is, as I said, at number 6, we would like to make reference to a common modular reporting platform. This can be DART, but it can be others. But what is important is that we use synergies also to bring information together. And so we have to use a platform where this information can easily be exchanged and compared. So this helps to structure the work and facilitates the reporting duties in the different processes and MAAs to an important extent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I will ask the Secretariat to respond to your question directly because it might be of interest of others. So, Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it would very much depend on what it is you're asking the Secretariat to do. As you know, in your mind clearly is the limited time available until we get to COP. And so may I suggest that the Secretariat consults with the Swiss delegation to understand better you know, the work that they have in mind, and we can advise you accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. So I will continue with my list. I give the floor to Cambodia, followed by South Africa, and then Georgia. Cambodia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Cambodia would like to align ourselves with the statement made by the EU, Switzerland, and Ghana. Cambodia wishes to highlight the significant involvement and cooperation from biodiversity-related convention to successfully implement the GBF. We take note the concrete proposal result from the Bern II consultation process with the MIR were reflected in the synergy and cooperation across relevant conventions to deliver the ambitious goal and target of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. However, Cambodia is concerned that the framework does still not reflect fully those elements as proposed in the report of the Bern II submitted in the information document CBD-SBI-3/info/29, especially the critical recommendation on strengthening cooperation and collaboration among MIR convention focal point to effectively implement the GBS at national level, such as element H for close interaction among national focal points of different MIR, and element 9 encourage, promote, and facilitate cooperation among MIR focal points in development and implementation of NBSA process. This need to further strengthen it in the draft GBS framework and its decision. Cambodia would like to reiterate that implementation of the GBS require effective integrated approach at national, regional, and global level, such as for NBSA, planning, monitoring, common indicator, coherent reporting, financing, and capacity building, which need to be strengthening in the text of the GBS and its decision, and through the practical tools such as the data reporting tool. Lastly, Cambodia welcomes the recommendation prepared by the CBD Secretariat in the document CBD/SBI-3/10, Section 5, Para 40, Element 4, that require the Executive Secretary in the consultation with the Secretariat of the Biodiversity-Related Convention and member of the Informal Advisory Group on Synergy to consider option and establishment of liaison mechanism among the parties to the various biodiversity-related conventions at an international level, and to submit the proposal for the consideration of the conference of the party at its 15th meeting and the next COP meeting. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia. I now give the floor to South Africa, followed by Georgia and then Egypt. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Ghana on behalf of Africa and wish to draw attention to the successful support of the Global Biodiversity Framework provided by the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation through the implementation of the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, GSPC, which has facilitated action amongst a wide range of stakeholders for plant conservation and has resulted in significant progress in plant-based action that has contributed in the implementation of the RCE targets. Progress was highlighted by interventions from parties during the informal Substar 24 session in February 2021 and are outlined in info document CBD Substar 24/info/20. Taking into account the importance of plant conservation for reaching the 2050 vision for biodiversity and following the recommendation of a licensed group meeting hosted by South Africa in 2018, proposal for an updated GSPC have been developed by Global Partnership for Plant Protection, GPPC. Chair, actions identified in this regard are fully aligned with the post-2020 GBF as reported in InfoDoc CBD Substar/24/info/34. Given that GSPC was previously adopted as a program of work under the Convention and that it is one of the cooperation initiatives that have been reviewed under the under Decision 14/30 and included in CBD/SBI-3/10, we request that it remains firmly part of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and we request the open-ended working group to revise paragraph C of the document CBD/W 2020/3/3/add/3 to specifically mention the global strategy for plant conservation by adding at the end the clause and an updated global strategy for plant conservation. In terms of cooperation on access and benefit sharing related work, we know that contributions by the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, and would like to encourage other relevant ABS-related conventions and organizations, such as the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, World Health Organization, and World Intellectual Property Organization to contribute as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. And I now give the floor to Georgia, followed by Egypt, and then Seychelles. Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So we can mostly align. First of all, we would like to thank the Switzerland for hosting the Bern dialogues and the leadership on this issue. At the same time, we mostly align ourselves with everyone who's spoken before us, EU, Switzerland, on issues that we should go beyond the biodiversity-related conventions and MEAs, and it is important to involve other multilateral environmental agreements, organizations, and initiatives as well. And we also highlight the importance of synergies and cooperation at the national level, and we think that this is really key for ensuring success. At the same time, we also consider that synergies and cooperation contributes to the resource mobilization as well through ensuring efficient use of existing resources. In addition, we would also acknowledge the regional conventions, for instance, the Bern Convention on the Conservation of European Wildlife and Natural Habitats, since these conventions also make a significant contribution to the implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity and achieving the common sustainable development and conservation goals, as well as implementation of the MBSEPs. We believe that their contribution should be better acknowledged and their participation in the implementation process, in planning and implementation process should be improved. And finally, we consider that multilateral environmental agreements, organizations, and initiatives should take the leadership in development and assessment of the indicators for monitoring of the framework that correspond to their mandates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Georgia. I now give the floor to Egypt, followed by Seychelles, and then Canada. Egypt, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة. أولا مصر تدعم.
Madam Chair, Egypt supports what has been said by Ghana and the European Union, as well as Switzerland. The three statements have been very important, and they ask to review the main points stated by these delegations. We are asking ourselves questions concerning cooperation between international conventions, organizations, and initiatives. Is this cooperation sufficient, or has it been sufficient to stop the loss of biodiversity and to conserve and protect it? We often see that we are confronted with specific situations, and every party, or rather every organization, has its own vision of the situation and its own way to discuss it. Madam Chair, one important thing.
Number two, نحن نتحدث عن.
First, constitutional reform. Doing it is more important than anything else. And secondly, reporting. This activity has been on for years now. However, there has been no real effort to coordinate this effort to prepare reports. Thirdly, resources available to implement specifically this kind of cooperation, especially as far as it concerns the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and genetic resources. We should review our action concerning the implementation this post-2020 framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Egypt. I now give the floor to Seychelles, followed by Canada and then Turkey. Seychelles, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Seychelles supports the statement made by Ghana on behalf of Africa. Seychelles welcomes the reports by the Secretariat on the cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives. There is a need to increase the synergies between the different UN conventions. There is a need for increased cooperation to avoid duplication related to communication and knowledge and for capacity and guidance, but to also access financial resources that can be used for joint programs of these conventions. This can ensure effective delivery of joint programs and ensure support for the delivery of the post-20 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Seychelles. I now give the floor to Canada, followed by Turkey, and then the Republic of Korea. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, Canada would like to express its support for improved coordination and cooperation amongst biodiversity-related conventions and other relevant international organizations and initiatives in a cost-effective way in order to enhance their implementation while respecting their specific objectives, their respective mandates, and legal autonomy. Secondly, Canada does not support tasking the Executive Secretary to undertake additional work to consider options for the establishment of a liaison mechanism among parties to the various biodiversity-related conventions at an intergovernmental level ahead of COP15, as this work has not yet been mandated by parties through a COP decision, as noted by our colleagues from Switzerland. In addition, given the multitude of cooperation mechanisms that already exist, Canada believes that proposals for the establishment of additional mechanisms should carefully consider the timing, necessity, value added of such proposals, as well as their size, the number of representatives from each instrument or body, the scope of the mechanism in terms of the conventions and organizations to seek their involvement, as well as the costs and resources required for its operation moving forward. We believe that this analysis is an important first step in order to avoid creating an avalanche of new mechanisms. Finally, related to the recommendation from SEPSA 23 and Working Group 8J11 on possible elements of work aimed at the integration of nature and culture in the post-2020, as actions stemming directly from paragraphs 19 and 26 of Decision 30 from COP14, Canada supports the proposal to forward the recommendation to the co-chairs of the OEWG for further consideration in the development of the post-2020, and also looks forward to the further consideration of these recommendations at COP15 under their respective agenda items on nature and culture. Canada would finally like to express its appreciation for continued discussions and collaboration between the CBD, UNESCO, and IUCN on advancing the areas of joint work concerning links between nature and culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I now give the floor to Turkey, followed by Republic of Korea, and then India. Turkey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a part of World Heritage Convention, CITES, Ramsar Convention, IPPS, ITPGRFA, as well as Rio Conventions, Turkey strongly supports all the efforts given for strengthening cooperation with other conventions and international organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Turkey. I now give the floor to Republic of Korea, followed by India and then Colombia. Republic of Korea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Republic of Korea recognizes the need for cooperation among biodiversity-related conventions and other related MEAs and organizations to support the post-2020 GBF. Strengthening such cooperation requires a specific action plan on common elements in implementing each convention. One of the key elements in implementation of the CBD and the post-2020 GBF is conservation and sustainable use of wildlife and cultivated species. This is a goal shared by CITES, CMS, and ITPG-RFA as well. With the view that an action plan for species should be the central element for cooperation among biodiversity-related convention to the implementation of the GBF, the Republic of Korea is working with IUCN and other partners to prepare the Global Species Action Plan, GSAP, which will set out actions required to achieve the species-related goals and targets. We encourage parties and international organizations to take part in this joint effort. In this regard, Madam Chair, we propose a new paragraph in the draft decision recommended to COP15, requesting the Executive Secretary to identify opportunities to cooperate with biodiversity-related conventions and other relevant MEAs and organizations, specifically to help achieve the goals and targets of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and put forward a list of relevant initiatives and action plans to be reviewed by Substa 25. We have submitted this text to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to India, followed by Colombia, then the Philippines. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Biodiversity being multidisciplinary and cross-cutting, any new post-2020 global biodiversity framework for biodiversity to support the transformational changes needed to halt biodiversity loss and achieve the 250 vision must include cooperation and partnership and other conventions, organizations, and stakeholders. An analysis reviewing the existing partnership to identify lessons learned, gaps, and potential areas or enhanced cooperation in support of post-2020 global biodiversity framework would be helpful. The Gandhinagar Declaration, adopted during CMS COP13 held in India in 2020, also calls for the inclusion in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework of the role of the various biodiversity-related conventions, as well as other relevant multilateral environment agreements for effective implementation, monitoring, and review of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. I now give the floor to Colombia, followed by the Philippines and Zimbabwe. Colombia, you have the floor.
We have 3 comments to make on this opportunity. First, it is an important task to both integrate MEA measurement tools in the GBF and integrate relevant elements of the GBF in these different MEAs, as Georgia, Canada, and other countries have mentioned before. This will not only reduce the burden of the parties in reporting, but also give coherence to the efforts we make to halt the environmental crisis. In addition, we support the inclusion of instruments such as nature-based solutions to harmonize implementation mechanisms and measurement. And nature-based solutions constitute a package of cost-effective tools to advance in the implementation of biodiversity, climate change, and desertification, among other MEAs, while also generating employment, sustainable economic reactivation, and social well-being to accomplish the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. Finally, cooperation among MEAs is crucial for the development and implementation of MBSAPs, which we have not discussed much yet, but it is of paramount importance to avoid duplication of efforts within parties and conventions regarding implementation and monitoring, as we have said before. This should be one additional point to the 4 identified by the UN agency support for member states during this 2021-2030, and to identify common indicators and measurement tools and capacity building for implementation of MBSAPs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. I now give the floor to Philippines, followed by Zimbabwe, and then Brazil. Philippines, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Philippines expresses its support to the statement made by the Cambodia. The Philippines likewise agrees that implementation of the GBF requires effective integrated approach at the regional, national, and global levels. But in order to facilitate action and synergies across countries, similarly situated and within smaller geographical locations and groupings, the Philippines would like to include sub-regional level therein, which we believe will ensure complementation of actions and ensure success among countries, taking into account their national circumstances. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Philippines. And I will now continue with Zimbabwe, followed by Brazil. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Afternoon, Chair.
Zimbabwe fully aligns itself with the statement by Ghana on behalf of Africa. And we support the report CBD/SBI/310 produced by the Secretariat on the cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives. We appreciate the work done in organizing consultation workshops for the biodiversity-related conventions, particularly during the drafting of this GBF to ensure synergy and complementarity of actions. We, however, would like to streamline these synergies to key conventions and initiatives that are biodiversity related. Zimbabwe aligns itself with the conclusions listed in the document and notes that an effective cooperation among the biodiversity related conventions will go a long way to reduce duplication and ensure cost-effective implementation of joint programs that will be proposed in the implementation of the GBF. We also note the development of the data reporting tool for MEAs and its rollout to national authorities and capacity building on the use of this tool across sectors to facilitate reporting within the various biodiversity-related conventions is fundamentally important. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. I now give the floor to Brazil, followed by Gabon. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's nice to see you here in the plenary. In line with this statement we had presented during the formal virtual sessions last year, Brazil understands that some initiatives that have been proposed under the OPs, such as the UN-wide system cooperation, would require further clarification, and we will submit additional comments in this regard. In addition, we would like to add ourselves to the statements made by Switzerland and Canada regarding some of the proposals that we understand that would fall out of the scope of CBI to decide and that would require a mandate from the COP. And finally, Brazil would like to reaffirm that synergies amongst conventions and agreements must be based on a party-driven basis to address the priorities and needs of parties, in particular developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I now give the floor to Gabon, followed by Mexico and then Norway. Gabon, you have the floor.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. Gabon supports the statement made by Ghana, speaking on behalf of the African group. Gabon would like to stress, indeed, that cooperation and synergy between the multilateral agreements on the environment, and especially those dealing with biodiversity, are absolutely essential for the consolidation and pooling of the means to implement this on a national scale. This means that we are called upon to look at these agreements at the international level, and we believe that the post-2020 GBF might be considered as one reference that allows for this synergy of action between agreements. We therefore stress the need to integrate into this process the sub-regional or regional initiatives such as the Abidjan Convention for the Africa region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabon. I now give the floor to Mexico, followed by Norway, and then Burkina Faso. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mexico supports the document on cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives, and we consider that is really fundamentally important. We're very happy that over the course of the last few days we've had an opportunity to hear about the coordinated work being done by various conventions, habitats, centers, and research centers as well. Yesterday, in fact, we had a number of executive secretaries all working together. In addition to our executive secretary, Elizabeth Marumanuena, we had the migrants, we had the Ramsar, we had International Convention on Fauna and Flora, as well as Genetic Resources and others, the Convention for the Protection of Plants. The value of having this information which is pooled and the exchange is critical to be able to strengthen our new global framework. So it'll be very valuable to have platforms where it will be possible to deposit and to share knowledge. We definitely need to optimize all of the resources for a resilient recovery that makes it possible for us to develop multifocal projects. And we also require this type of cooperation to be able to articulate the efforts that help us to face the challenges of climate change, desertification, and in a matter of, as a matter of priority, the loss of biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mexico. I now give the floor to Norway, followed by Burkina Faso.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the latest science tells us that we only have 10 years to solve the climate and biodiversity crisis. Enhancement of cooperation and synergies across instruments and processes will be very important to improve results. We would therefore like to underline the importance of phrasing the global biodiversity framework in such a way that it is meaningful across instruments and equally valid for marine and terrestrial issues. We also want to underline that it is really important to have input from the biodiversity-related conventions when we work on the global biodiversity framework. On a more practical level, we would like to emphasize the importance of DART to tie the biodiversity-related conventions closer together in reporting. This will increase efficiency and lower administrative burdens in reporting for parties. We also support the intervention from Switzerland on a reference to the burn process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. I now give the floor to Burkina Faso, followed by Tanzania. Burkina Faso, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Burkina Faso would like to support the statement made by Ghana when Ghana spoke on behalf of the African group. We also welcome the work done by the Secretariat on cooperation. We believe that we have to extend cooperation with the other conventions and international organizations, as was said by Ghana. Madam Chair, we would like to appeal for cooperation and synergy at the international level, that it should become a reality to facilitate cooperation at the regional and sub-regional level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I now give the floor to Tanzania, followed by Saudi Arabia and Belize. Tanzania, you have the floor.
By Ghana. Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Tanzania reaffirms the intervention made by Ghana on behalf of Africa and supported other parties as well. Tanzania welcomes the report on the work carried out by Secretariat during intersessional period regarding cooperation with other conventions, international organizations, and initiatives. Tanzania commends the Secretariat on this work despite the challenges on the pandemic, particularly on the involvement of other conventions and international organizations in preparation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and towards its implementation. We believe this continuous engagement will significantly contribute to the attainment of the targets of the framework and their subsequent reporting. Tanzania would like to encourage that such cooperation demonstrated at secretariat level could really fruit, resulting when also established at regional, sub-regional, national, and sub-national levels. In this regard, Tanzania itself, with recommendations mentioned by Ghana on behalf of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanzania. I now give the floor to Saudi Arabia, followed by Belize and then Argentina. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. المملكة العربية السعودية تؤيد.
Thank you very much. Saudi Arabia supports this synergy between the various conventions and international organizations. And using that as a starting point, we have set up a national commission where we have represented all of the conventions. in order to facilitate the implementation of the provisions from the various conventions in our country. Moreover, there is an issue that needs to be looked at, I believe, and that is the implementation mechanism of this synergy. When we're talking about the secretariats of whether we're talking about the secretariats of the various conventions or submission of reports or further strengthening of capacity building, in other words. We have to take into account the national level in addition to the regional and international levels. So we have to look very closely at the implementation. I'm talking about the mechanisms for implementation, which might well, in some cases, be difficult to implement. So we have to reflect very carefully and think about this, because we can start this, but then we have to think, how is it going to continue in the future? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saudi Arabia. I'll now give the floor to Belize, followed by Argentina, then Palestine. Belize, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Belize wishes to highlight the critical need for enabling environments and instruments for cooperation at the highest level of national governments and conventions. This can only be achieved through the rollout of an integrated approach to national and international development planning and strategizing. This will solidify priorities and establishment of interconnected strategies across sectors and conventions. This will also establish and guide a mandate for collaborative approaches to the achievement of not only biodiversity actions, but other socioeconomic and climate change actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Belize. I now give the floor to Argentina, followed by Palestine. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Many statements were made this morning, and Argentina would like to reaffirm the implementation of all of the conventions in a way which is consistent with their respective mandates, as has been pointed out by a number of delegations. However, we would like to express our concern about certain attempts to which forgets perhaps leaves out the historic considerations. These considerations are crucially important when it comes to proposals to extend the mandate of Decision 1434 to have a post-2020 for a system which would apply to the entire United Nations system, in other words, a universal system. The CBD COP probably doesn't have the competence to take such a decision of this magnitude, in other words. Far from being a weakness, the fragmentation of the environmental multilateral system stems from a distinctive characteristic of international law, its flexibility, in other words. This is something which is positive and which has allowed us to reach a very large number of conventions, agreements in many different areas in very few decades. So many that the matters that are covered by international law, it would have been impossible to think that this might happen if the international community had adopted a holistic, integrated approach. So in this sense, my country shares the importance of sharing the synergy between cooperation with the conventions of the United Nations, international organizations, and so on, such as the original recommendation, which is to increase the consistency, avoid overlapping. But it's important to stress that there's a difference of the mandates, which needs to be observed, these different mandates. And we've made proposals to this effect, and therefore we believe that we should avoid adding new tasks and work programs on top of the recommendations of the subsidiary body. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Argentina. I now give the floor to Palestine, followed by Nepal. Palestine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We support all the initiatives aiming at fostering the synergy between different conventions. We align ourselves with Ghana, Switzerland, Canada, and the EU. We stress the importance of implementing the excellent tool DART that aims at facilitating the synergy between conventions and facilitate the sharing of information without any duplication. CBD should be a pioneer facilitating the cooperation with the other conventions with the aim of implementing the objectives of such conventions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Palestine. Well, colleagues, I have been informed that we have now come very close to the end of our session today. It has been a very rich discussion on this agenda item. I think we still have, is it 7 or 8 parties who asked for the floor? Yeah, if the Secretary please can read out those who have not asked for the floor, because I think we need to close the list. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So we've got Nepal, Togo, Bolivia, Chad, Serbia, Kenya, Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo, Peru, Ethiopia, and Namibia on the list. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretariat. Well, I think, unfortunately, we cannot continue this discussion. We will not be able to conclude this agenda item today. So as we have reached the end of a plenary session today, and we do have so many parties left, so we will come back to this agenda item at the start of our next plenary on the 22nd March at 10 a.m. I'm sorry for that, but the Secretariat has noted down and very clearly the parties who has asked for the floor, and the list, of course, closed now. So we'll continue with the parties just read out and at our next plenary meeting. I'm sorry for that. And since time is running, I will not be able to hear any reports. I have, right? No. I have, unfortunately, to conclude our meeting today. So, distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of our SBI plenary meeting for today. Before closing this meeting, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat for some announcement. Yes. If you have any. Yes. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I would just like to remind you that we have a contact group on of the working of the open-ended working group today, this afternoon, and this will be contact group 1. In the evening, we have two contact groups, one on SBI, on capacity building agenda item 7, and one contact group on SBSTA agenda item 3, the monitoring framework. And in the monitoring framework, they will continue with and it's on the website. So before I get it wrong, let me just check. They will continue with the targets and then go to paragraphs 1 to 7. 1 to 7. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. So, thank you, colleagues, for today. We would like to remind delegates we reconvene the SBI plenary on Tuesday, the 22nd March, in the morning session. And delegates are kindly invited to check the schedule for the latest information. So, colleagues, this meeting of SBI plenary is now closed. Thank you.